So it's 11 o'clock and I'd like to welcome everybody to the special meeting of the City of Delray Oaks City Council. Today is Tuesday, February 9th, and it is 9 o'clock. Karen, could you please do a roll call?
Councilmember Gagliotti.
Here.
Councilmember Shirley.
Here.
Councilmember Donaldson.
Here.
Vice Mayor Lintel. Mayor Kerr.
Here. Thank you. We're going to open up for public comments. Must deal with matters subject to the jurisdiction of the city, and on matters not appearing on the agenda may do so now. Let's go out. So I see Ken Rutherford.
Hopefully I will get it right this time. Thank you very much. I speak today to lodge my ongoing objection to the current membership to the Finance Committee. I believe that Councilmember Lintel was correct to seek residential participation for this committee. I believe that the membership of 3 council members on this committee not only violates city ordinance, it seems inconsistent with our city's general plan, seeking increased public participation in city business, and it goes against the historical precedent of membership of this committee that as recently as last year had residential members. While I appreciated Mr. Lorca replying to my email that, quote, with respect to the committees, the council exercised their discretion to interpret the requirements of the Delray Oaks Municipal Code, I disagree with his conclusion. Councilmember Lintel expressed her concern and suggested that a member of the public be on the committee, with someone from the Oaks being most appreciated. Her suggestion was immediately rebuffed by the mayor, who sought confirmation from Mr. Lorca, as city attorney, that the membership is limited to members of council. Mr. Lorca, while acknowledging that he did not have immediate access to the municipal code, opined that the committee membership was in fact so limited. I continue to disagree both with his legal opinion on this issue and with his conclusion that the council exercised their discretion to interpret the code how they wished on this matter. Firstly, the issue of membership qualification was never properly debated and considered by the council. Secondly, the council is not free to interpret the code however they wish. They must follow the law, or when the law is a city ordinance, they may change the law. Our city attorney is available to help them understand their legal obligations. Where the city attorney witnesses council taking action contrary to the law or against the interests of the city, he or she is obligated to advise as such in order to protect the city, which after all is the client. The council is not. It seems to me that further research and discussion is needed on this issue, and whether having 3 council members on the Finance Committee violates Ordinance 2.04.190 that prohibits any standing committee of the council that is less than the council as a whole. I ask that the appointments be withdrawn and the city follow its own laws regarding this and the other committees in section 2.04.180. That code section requires the mayor to appoint 4 separate committees directly related to ongoing city business. They are Public Safety, Parks and Recreation, Public Works, and Finance. Based on the language of our city's ordinance, these committees are mandatory and not discretionary. There seems to be no obstacle to appointing a Finance Committee. However, calls to make appointments to these other equally important committees seems to go ignored. I again request that these committees be appointed forthwith to bring the city into compliance with our own laws, or that the council immediately modify the ordinance accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. I am not seeing any other public comment or in attendance. So what I'll do is I'll pull it back to move on with the business. So today, the first item under new business is consider approval of amended contract for acting city manager Hoyne. What I'd like to do is turn this over to Alex. Could you share a little bit about what you created?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. With respect to the item before you, it's very simple as directed by council, 1 page, maybe 1 page and a half, contract extension for acting city manager Hoyne to continue on in his role as acting city manager until the pleasure of the council changes. We drafted it such that it's sort of an evergreen or ongoing agreement. In the sense that it will continue to be operative until either party initiates a termination order of the agreement. So there's no hard stop to the agreement. It's I think there's a 30-day notice provision in there as to when it would as to when either party could terminate the agreement.
Oh, wonderful. So yes, I was reading it and I did note the terminate upon 30 days before to be effective. So what I'd like to do is go out to the council. Does anyone have any comments? Let's start with John.
No, no comments.
Okay. Scott?
No, no comments other than it's a good document.
Okay. And Kim?
Nope, none for me.
All right. And I don't either. So let's go out to the public. Any public comment on this amended employment agreement? Okay, we'll bring it back to the council. I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we accept the amended contract or the contract amendment as drafted by staff in its full grandeur.
I'll second.
Oh,
All right. So Karen, could you please do a roll call vote?
Certainly. Councilmember Gagliotti,
Aye.
Councilmember Shirley,
Aye.
Councilmember Donaldson,
Aye.
Mayor Kerr.
Aye. All right. So the amendment passes unanimously. We'll move on to item 3B, the mid-year budget review draft report. So I don't know, am I turning this over to you, Acting City Manager Hoyne?
Yes, you would be, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay.
Good morning, Mayor, Council, visitors, Roberto, everyone else, staff. Thank you for joining us this morning. First of all, I appreciate having that contract extended so we can continue to do business, and I appreciate your support. And I'll be working as hard as I can to earn that support. Before you this morning for the Finance Committee is our draft mid-year budget review and amendment for fiscal year 2020-2021. We have recommendations. We recommend to review and also comment on this document. Staff has been working hard the last several weeks. I would like to thank Roberto Moreno for really taking a deep dive into a lot of line items that maybe we wouldn't have looked at as hard in the past. As you know, COVID has continued to play a factor in the city's budget, specifically with a decrease in revenues and even more specifically in regards to our cannabis businesses. The city does rely heavily on cannabis, the cannabis industry, and specifically one of our businesses is having a difficult time during the pandemic and has deferred their tax payments for this year as per the council's direction last year. And their estimates are they will not be able to re-engage with those payments until sometime in the summer. So with that in mind, staff took a extremely conservative approach, a worst case scenario approach when it came to taxes as far as we could project out through the rest of the year and adjusted the budget accordingly. This should be also understood in light of the fact that last year we took a very conservative approach to the budget, holding one full-time police officer position open and also adjusting down on several line items. So it's not as though we had as much room to cut as we normally would have because we've already done that. So keep in mind, staff is working very hard to make adjustments and to make projections to bring at least a balanced budget to the council. I would like to turn this over to Roberto. And again, I'd like to thank him. We've put in a lot of time to really drill down and get some accurate numbers. There may be line items that are not drilled down as far as we would like. That's because we take a big picture, large muscle memory approach to this. When we do a mid-year budget review, we don't look for the $500 or $1,000 savings necessarily because those will fluctuate throughout the year and they're kind of hard to project on that level. But some of the big ticket items as far as contracts, staff costs, personnel, things like that are where we focused on. Roberto, I'll turn it over to you if you'd like to expound upon that.
Okay, yes, thank you very much, Mayor Kerr, members of the council, if you don't mind, I'd like just to take a couple of quick minutes to introduce myself because I do see you have newer folks here on the council that I hadn't really talked to before. So I'm Robert Moreno. I'm under contract through Regional Government Services, providing fiscal services, kind of like a finance officer on call as you need me. I used to work for myself, doing the same work for the city since about 2015. And I've been in local government finance in Monterey County for 30 some years. So I'm a little bit familiar with Delray Oaks and other agencies on the peninsula. So what I'd like to do is take the staff report, which you no doubt have seen already, but I'd like to kind of walk you through a few of the main highlights from this report. And we'd like to start with an overview, and then we'll get into the detail as much as you would like to. As was mentioned, this is a draft. This is going to be asking for your review, your comments, and then we will come back at the next council meeting with a final document. So in looking at the big picture, we were originally budgeted to have a surplus of about 240,000 at the beginning of the year. Due to these mid-year budget adjustments, total estimated revenues are coming down. Appropriations, the expenditures have also come down, but not to the degree that revenues have to come down. So therefore, the estimated fund balance is still going to be a surplus at the end of the year. We're not eating into the savings of the city. We just won't have as much of a surplus at the end of the year. And this is basically where most of the changes are taking place. In addition, we're asking to move some of the appropriations, the expenditures out of the general fund into the gas tax fund, which by law can only be used for street-related purposes. And as such, we'll get more into the details, but we'd like to move some of those expenditures here. There's 34,000 coming in revenues. Now that'll be offset by 25,000 in expenditures. There'll still be a surplus in the gas tax fund. One item that is new is the Coronavirus Relief Fund, money that the state got from the federal government to help local agencies. Because of the size of the city, all they could receive is $50,000, which can be presumed to be used for police services, which is what the city reported. It was used as such. So there's $50,000 that was not budgeted as revenue at the beginning of the year. We have that. We'd like to just basically move that money over to the general fund to pay for the expenses of the general fund. So it's just a transfer from here to the general fund. This fund will basically go away at the end of this year. It was just one-time money that came in. We don't have access to that anymore unless the federal government decides to provide some more later. But for right now, that's it. The other change in expenditures is there's 15,000 in planning expenses for the habitat management plan. That can be funded from the Fora Habitat Management Fund. That's the 700,000 plus that the city received from Fora for that purpose. So we're asking to appropriate 15,000 for that, those expenses. So that's the big picture. Before I get into any of the details, any questions on the overall picture? I mean, overall, the city's still looking good, much better than many of your fellow agencies on the peninsula and in Monterey County. I must say, because I'm familiar with their circumstances, but we'll get into some of these details and some of them too. I think Mayor Kerr has some questions, which caused us to dig a little deeper. So we've got some more detail here. I'm going to start with some of the highlights. And do you want to go through every single one of them, or I was just going to hit the highlights and let you ask specifically because you have the report already about those items?
Roberto, I would suggest that you go over highlights and then council members can go through if they have particular questions on any particular item. Is that okay with everyone?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, have you noticed that I signed in? This is Pat.
Thank you, Pat.
Hi, Pat.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, Roberto, it's all yours.
Okay, so let me, okay, so let me share my screen once again, and you have the staff report. But I wanna, let me bring it back up again here. There's something that I just noticed on the staff report here. So the on here, this is, as this mentions here, the estimated revenues actually came down by 163,240. However, as I'm looking at this, this says 205,240. I'm going to bring up there was an adjustment made that I need to bring up to show what the end result was between this publishing and something happened in getting it into the Word document from the original. So I'll show you the original. So 163,240 is the change. The biggest changes was mentioned is we've lost quite a bit of, it's not lost. We've deferred cannabis tax revenue until next year. The vendors cannot, the clients cannot provide the tax revenue right now until next year. So that money is coming down. It is not gone. It's just will be deferred until next year. The actually, let me just bring up the worksheet itself. So the summary that we have here is okay. Now I'll tell you what. I don't want to make this more confusing, but I'll go into the details. So this 286 is the biggest reduction in revenues. And all the other reductions are basically related to COVID activity. There's not as much taking place. A simple one being like the police reports and police services and public events. There's no public events basically, and the police are not doing as much as would be done in the past because everybody's trying to maintain their social distancing, but they're still carrying on their services. The items that are kind of offsetting this big increases, we do have 2 grants that we're budgeting for that you have received, that just haven't been recorded. 65,000 from AMBAC for the REAP grant for housing element, and then another 65,000 from Housing Community Development at the state for the LEAP grant. Those 130,000, that's great, that's revenue, but it will be used to pay for the housing element. So there's also an appropriation on the other side to offset that. Those are the main changes in the revenue, and I apologize, this should have said 163. I need to go through and see what's changed here. The 163,240. The other big change is this 50,000 that's we're taking from the coronavirus relief fund and moving it to the general fund because that's where all the expenses took place in response to COVID-19, including the police department. So the revenue is coming down primarily because of this. It's not coming down the entire amount because we did get some additional revenues, but there's other items that decreased here. As you can see, a lot of it is just because the activities didn't take place. Any specific questions on the revenues?
No.
Roberto, can we like ask questions about the revenues, and then after you talk about the expenses, we can talk about the expenses?
Yes, please.
So I can't see the full screen right now. So do any of the council have questions?
No.
Madam Mayor, I do.
Okay, Ms. Shirley, go ahead.
Roberto, for the cannabis tax deferral, I understand that the cannabis business is depressed in its sales. And so I'm confused in that amount, that 286, that's all tax deferral. None of it is just a reduced sales that they're experiencing. So we're going to see all of that.
So it is all deferral. It's not reduced sales because they are still reporting to the city how much they're selling. They're just not paying the tax. They can't pay the tax right now. So we do know that that's about how much they're going to be short, which is also the difference between what we had actually anticipated, the original 580. They were budgeted to pay that. And as we looked at their sales, that is their sales. That's what's deferred. Now the collection is going to be a different story next year, but it is deferral.
Right. And is that all of our businesses that are deferring, cannabis businesses?
No.
Do we know?
It's primarily one, let's see, Jeff, do you want to say?
Yeah, primarily it's one business that's working on a deferral process right now. And it should be noted that we do have a couple of licensees who have not even initiated operations yet. So that may fluctuate as those licensees get into production. Of course, we have MBAM and there's a pause there. They're a new licensee. So it's subject to fluctuation. It's mostly from deferral. Karen can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most other folks are pretty caught up on their taxes. They come in at different times in the year, of course, with their payments. But I would also caution that's, deferral is hopeful because it's not in the bank yet. So we want to be. That's why we took this very conservative approach and didn't count that as far as income and revenue.
Okay. And so then the rental for the Public Works building, that's also a deferral as well?
That's a little more complicated matter. That is something that we'll be bringing up in council on the 23rd. I'll be speaking with the city attorney on how to rectify that. It was partially a deferral. When the deferral went into effect, it was supposed to be revisited. We haven't revisited it. We will be, and we'll be bringing recommendation to council about how to rectify that, probably with an eye on taking back control of that particular property. And Alex and I will brief you on the 23rd.
Okay, thank you. I think that's it for me on this page.
Thanks. Scott, any questions?
Yeah, I just had a few questions that kind of relates to what Councilmember Shirley was talking about with the cannabis tax. So if I understand it correctly, I Squared really is the bulk of that. The other three manufacturing and distribution companies, so I'm talking Spark, Seaweed, and Utopia, they haven't provided any type of revenue to us in the form of cannabis tax.
That's so true.
Jeff, may I?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that you go ahead with that one, Karen.
Utopia pays on a regular basis. Seaweed and Sparks are the two that Jeff was referring to that they're not up and running yet.
Okay, and do we know when MBAM or the renamed MBAM will be back online? Estimate?
I think it's a matter of a week or two.
Okay.
No exact.
Thanks, Karen.
Uh-huh.
And do we have any idea on the sales tax, how much of that includes cannabis sales tax?
If I may, Karen, so unfortunately, the sales tax, we don't have access to that data. That goes through the state. The state did grant the deferral separate from what the city did on the sales tax, but that was up to each agency, each company to request that. Who requested it and how much, we don't have access to that data, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah, just for me, it's definitely something to keep an eye on because really we're hanging on the success of really one of our cannabis businesses right now. And that's not a good place to be in. I have no other, I do have one other question on the business license.
Mhm.
So we're looking at $210K on that. How much of that is cannabis business license?
Mm-mm.
Any idea on that?
I believe we've funded or projected 35,000 for cannabis business licenses this year. I know that I believe currently we're up to 30 in collecting that. The thing to remember about cannabis business licenses is it's not with the fiscal year. It's when they apply and when they are approved for that particular license. So those fees come in throughout the year. So it's kind of a rotating thing. We may go all the way through May in the fiscal year and be at 30,000 or 25,000. And then in May, 2 licenses may be due. So then they'll pay. And I believe, Karen, we have collected one of the 2 that are outstanding, and there's, I believe, something maybe due in May or something like that to complete.
That sounds about right.
To complete those licenses. So they're up to date. Everybody is current. And that is the 35 is the cannabis business license line item.
Okay, and there's no deferral agreement or anything like that regarding the actual license then?
No.
No.
Okay. All right, those are all my questions. Thanks.
Thanks. Pat, any questions on revenue?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. I have actually a couple of comments. So yes, our cannabis is being deferred and maybe lower, obviously, because of the situation. But I'd like you to take a look at the sales tax add-on. So we did not increase the sales tax add-on estimate, but you'll notice that, you know, in the first 6 months, we're at 460,000. Now you could conceivably double that, and that would be the year. And so that would, and we only have 680 budgeted. So there's a lot of nice wiggle room there. You know, that's 220,000. So that could definitely offset. The other thing is, Scott, in particular, there is a line for cannabis business licenses on there. So it is not a part of the 210. It's just 4 lines down, cannabis business permits. And so we're missing 2. The other thing that's just interesting is building permits and plan check fees are increased a little bit. And I think that's because people are home and they're working on their houses. So it's interesting when you start digging. I don't know. I love these numbers. The other thing is on the grants, the 50,000 for CARES has not been added to the budget adjustments. So there's another 50K there. And yeah, that was it for me. So it's more observations than anything. I think we're doing amazingly well considering what all of the other cities are doing, cannabis decrease or deferral or not. But on that note, I'll turn it back over to Roberto.
I have one.
Mayor, through the chair. I have a hard stop at 11:30. In fact, I've got to get going now. I appreciate the report, and I'll be going through it. I know that there's no action to be taken; it's an information only. But with that, I bid you all adieu.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Scott,
See you,
did you
John.
have a question?
Yeah, just a clarification. Roberto, you had talked about the sales tax and kind of breaking it down. How do we get a breakdown of where that sales tax revenue is coming from? I mean, which one of our businesses is paying how much? Is that even possible that we can get that kind of fidelity on that?
Okay, so if I may, technically you cannot get that kind of detail. By law, you cannot get the detail of every business. We can get a report that summarizes it by category, as long as there's enough customers in that category. If there's like 15 or 20 customers, they can give us the total for that category, and that gives you an idea what you're collecting from that. But if there's only a handful of customers, you can't have access to that data, because then it basically tells you how much those 2 or 3 customers are making. We can see by getting a report from HDL that provides a summary of where it comes from within the legal means, how much they know how much data you can have and how much you can't. So we can get an idea. And of course, it's always after the fact, and it's for those who paid. It doesn't provide data on those who have not paid, because the state doesn't have those figures, and they haven't been reported to us through HDL, who is your company that provides this service. I mean, we can certainly try and come back with some more info, but it will not be to the point where you can see exactly which business is providing the most and who's not.
Yeah, and that's fine. I think as long as we get kind of an idea of where it's coming from, that I believe that would be very helpful. So thanks, Roberto.
Okay.
So also tied to that, Kim, just a moment, please. Does cannabis earn a sales tax?
Yes.
It does. Okay.
Well,
And so,
excuse me, at the retail level, not your manufacturing. not
right.
the sales tax, but the retail level, yes.
And so when we have 580 in cannabis tax, that's on top of the sales tax, correct?
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Kim, sorry about that.
No, I just had another revenue question. I was under the interest earned. I was wondering why there is such a discrepancy between 2019 and 2020 in terms of the amount of interest that we've earned. I was wondering if the accounts changed or what made that difference.
Okay, so we're talking on the investment earnings.
Roberto, it's on page 1 at the very bottom under other.
Okay, so let me bring that screen up. Okay, so we're talking about the difference between, here we're interest earned.
Yes.
Okay, so, well, let me start by saying, I guess when we did this 40,000 estimate at the beginning of the year, we were overly optimistic. Rates have not come up. They've stayed very low. And the city has to invest money in a secure way. We cannot take risks. It's governed by state law as to what you can invest in and what you can't. And right now, most of the money is in the state pool, which is what the state investment, where all the monies are, and they are getting 0.5%, which is what the city's getting. That's what the whole state is getting. That's what we get. And unfortunately, so let me see, this heading was this was halfway through the year. So last year, we did get a little bit more than this year, but because it's always like a quarter behind. Interest rates were a little bit higher right now. They've stayed low for a while. So it's just a matter of the investment return. And you do have money there, which is good, but it's not earning much.
And is that our money that's in the reserve?
Yes, that is the city money. Yep.
Okay. And we don't get to earn interest on the money that we have waiting for like South Boundary Road, that, 8 million that's in an escrow account. We don't get to earn interest on that.
Unfortunately not. It's tied up in escrow. There might be a little bit. I think they have it invested in Wells Fargo, but I'm sure it's minimal because the money has to be made available the minute you guys want it. So they can't invest it long term. It's probably like in a regular passbook savings type account.
I see. And then I had one more question. The COP monies, it seemed that was one time. I was just wondering what that was. It's under grants.
Yes. So the city gets what's called the COP grants. All the cities in Monterey County, actually every city gets an amount by nature. Most cities here, and especially Del Rey, gets 100,000. That's by law. That's the minimum, and everybody gets. The last couple of years, the state has had a surplus of where this money comes from, and so they've given it out one time. It's about 50,000, 56,000 this year, and then 50,000 or so last year. But it's not guaranteed. That's just they happen to have extra money, and that's why we only budget for 100,000 because that is guaranteed by law that you're supposed to get. Where they go, 100,000.
The next page.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's what you're guaranteed to get. It just so happens that the city did get an extra 56,000, and it just depends on the source for this revenue, which I forget what tax is coming from. If the state has extra money, they will allocate it out.
And what does COP stand? Does it stand for something?
Well, it's for police related, but Jeff?
Community related policing, I believe.
Okay. Okay, that's it for me. Thanks.
Any other questions from the council? I just had one more observation. In my interactions with the state, it appears that this year they will have in the, I don't know, $20-30 billion windfall. So it'll be interesting to see how those kinds of funds will be affected. But they're also anticipating significant deficits the next 2 years. So any of those kinds of grants, it'll be very important to watch. And the mayors have been fighting for additional city CARES funding. so that we may also have that. It's a very unique year in how the money is coming and going. So there are further possibilities for our care related or our COVID related funding. So on that, let's move back to Roberto for expenses.
Okay, so in this case, if you don't mind, I'm probably just gonna go ahead and, can you see my screen? So this is the staff report that you have. We'll just go through them kind of the way they are, and we'll stop at the major highlights. So this staff was able to reduce expenses by 104,000 altogether. Some increases, some decreases, but altogether, if you refer back to some of your other staff reports, when Dino was on leave and Kim was going to retire, there's about 137,000 in savings from those positions. That's going to be coming out of the payroll budget. However, the temp employee has been working quite a bit more to help make up for Kim's departure and get care in the hand, so need a little bit more there. Overtime, we were able to reduce the overtime. There's not as much in the way of overtime activity taking place, but that's because the city has more reserves, and the reserves have been doing quite a bit more. So we're putting more into the reserves.
And Roberto, can I just interrupt briefly so council understands some of the operating terrain in the police department? You know, we had two officers out for COVID for quite some time now. We had one officer who was injured with an injured wrist due to a violent suspect they were arresting. And then, you know, we briefly, the last couple of weeks, have had an officer out due to a COVID exposure. Your police department's currently operating over 50% down in full-time staffing. However, the reserves have been able to pick up that difference. They are working a lot of hours, and they're very appreciated. And we've actually worked to strengthen the reserve program with a couple of reserve officers either under background investigation or coming on board to fill that need. So we moved money out of overtime and increased reserves because, quite frankly, we don't have enough officers to work overtime right now. So that's where that money's coming from. And just so you have a better understanding of the difficulties of having a small agency.
Thank you. These other savings, these are small, but this is 5 months worth of savings on the city manager's compensation. Let's see, this 3,000 in ammunition, there's sufficient supply on hand, so the police department is holding back where it can and reducing expenses. There's some minor items. So here's the street sweeping. We're suggesting that we move that to the gas tax fund. So the city gets gas tax money, which by law has to be segregated, can only be spent on street related purposes. In the past, at the end of the year, the auditors kind of go through different gyrations to get the numbers to match, because we do want to spend the gas tax money. It's always been kind of some work that's taken place after the fact. To make it easier, we'd suggest that we move this expense. Street sweeping is street related. We move it to the gas tax fund and also street lighting, and it will on an ongoing basis just become part of the gas tax budget. It'll be taken care of from those items, and basically there's enough to pay for those two items. And then we just have the general fund to deal with the rest of these other items. It just makes the accounting a little bit simpler. The main reason we're doing this, and it moves it out. In this case, moves those expenses out of the general fund to make it a little easier to balance all these numbers. These other items are smaller. Okay, so the member dues and contributions, we did budget 56,000 to begin with, but then an item was taken to council. Okay, who all are we contributing to? That list was reduced down to 15,000. Well, actually, this 15,951. So everybody's been paid that the council approved. Unless there's going to be some changes to that, we're saying let's just take that off the table. And at this point, the budget is only 16,000. As we go to the next year's budget, I guess you can take a look again if you want to contribute towards some of these other agencies. Strategic planning was reduced since you only had one session this year. Police training, we're reducing it because nobody's traveling anywhere for training. Everything is done on site. And so then now we get to the contractual services where most of these changes are taking place. So the planning services, we put 130,000. We're actually budgeting 130,000 for the housing element, and that's what's being funded by those two grants. That's going to take care of the housing element, all those expenses. Now, you're not going to spend 130,000 this year, but in order to keep the numbers straight, we're budgeting the revenue, the expenses, whatever's left over at the end of this year, then we'll carry that over to next year. Because we are putting the housing cost down here, then the 150,000 that was there for planning services is being reduced to 75,000. You're definitely going to spend 50,000. We already got estimates from Denise Duffy and Associates. There's 50,000 that's going to be spent this year. We're leaving another 25,000 in case other planning request services come into play. But that's the change in the planning budget.
Roberto, some of those are coming into play. If you recall, there are some things from the strategic planning session that is going to take into account some planning funds and some presentations that are coming up in the next couple of months. So that's why we left a safe amount to be budgeted there for the extra workload that we determine in strategic planning.
Okay, yes. Then we have accounting. There used to be a contract for my services of about 35,000. With Kim's departure, that contract was increased to 131,000 to be funded basically from Kim's the savings from the former employee, and we can talk more about that. So actually, so originally, if I may, at this point on this one, this is taking care of all the accounts payable, the payroll, the budget, the audit, all those sort of things. And the original agreement called for a review as part of this mid-year budget, but unfortunately, we're not quite ready to do a real apples to apples comparison. It'll probably be another month or two. So maybe as we go through the preliminary budget process for next year, that'll be a good time to kind of do more of an apples to apples comparison. Once we get through some logistics, because of the turnover and the changes, there were some additional costs that were not anticipated. Then we'll know exactly how much it will be on an ongoing basis. That's for the RGS contract. Legal budget was 150. We already spent 133, and I guess you're very familiar with your legal costs, so we're asking to increase this by 70,000 to 220,000. There was the contract for a project manager, which originally was much higher than this. It was brought down to 25,000. At this point, don't anticipate needing a project manager through the rest of this fiscal year. So that's a decrease of 25,000. Again, street lighting, we're looking to move that to the gas tax fund. And then there's some savings in the capital projects. The slurry seal project was budgeted at 180, ended up at 130, so there's some savings there. And then the solar panels were budgeted at 80,000, spent 52, so there's some savings there too. These are projects that are completed and done. So this is actual savings. There's no potential for additional costs because the projects are done. So when you add up the pluses and the minuses, and we're talking a reduction of 104,000. Be happy to answer any questions or dig into more details.
Kim.
Roberto, can you explain under supplies? It says materials supply. The total budget's 58,000. It went up by 2,000. I'm just wondering what sort of things are in that, because we have a separate office supply budget. I'm assuming there's a different police supply budget. I don't know what's in materials and supplies. Can
Roberto,
anyone?
I'll be glad to handle that one. So our budget is much expanded on the line items from several years ago. We've been trying to get drawn down into more detail, and we do so every year. We'll be doing so when we get to this next budget prep for the next 2-year budget. So from supplies, that could be anything. That could be coffee for the office. It could be, lighting fixtures. It could be desks and chairs, things such as that. There are office supplies because we try and keep track of that. In police supply, we're still working on drilling down on those things as well. So, in police supply, it could be uniforms, it could be furniture, it could be, firearms, things like that. And for the city, it runs the whole gamut of what we use to run the city. Office supplies, we try and stick to pens, paper, pencils, maybe filing cabinets, but other supplies that the city needs, it could be bags for the dogs in the park for dog poop, and it runs the gamut. And we're working on trying to break those down. And I think we'll take a closer look and get it a little closer this next budget. It's just a continual, kind of a continual process. And we started from a much more compacted line item budget a few years ago, and we're getting a little bit better at expanding those. I hope that answers your question.
So police supplies are also within that materials and supply line item?
Yes, except for the special police supply. I don't know the original story why we have special police supply as a line item. We're working on that as well. I'll give you an example how things move around. When you look at members' dues and contributions, and there's that big reduction that Roberto spoke to. One of the things that was in members' dues and contributions was our contract with Axon for our body cameras and our tasers for the police department. And we actually put a new line item in last year, which I think is police equipment lease, because it's more of a lease services thing. So we're trying to get more accurate with that, and we'll take a much closer look at each line item this next budget prep year.
Okay, that's great to hear. Thank you. I was wondering, the work, I know the council had approved up to 30% planning for South Boundary Road. For that project costs, are those in here anywhere?
So if I may, are you talking about South Boundary Road, not the sewer design, but just the
realignment design? As I recall, the council had approved up to 30% of that design, and so I was just wondering if that's noted in this budget anywhere.
Let me look.
Those are. Go ahead, Mayor.
Can I piggyback on that? So my question is tied to that. Where does that money come out of? It seems as that, right, because we have another budget for the South Boundary Road. We have another pot of money. So it seems to me that it should be coming out of that.
Yeah,
rather than the general fund.
It's not the general fund. It's in one of the dedicated funds that we have from FORA funding that we received when FORA shut down. They're in separate dedicated accounts, and whenever we get bills related to those items, and correct me if I'm wrong, Roberto, there's two main ones. There's the intersection realignment and design, and then there's the road design as well. And we separate those through different coding for those funds, and they come out of that, and it's not related to the general fund. And I'll let Roberto expand on that if he wants.
So I guess that is the reason we're having this draft discussion, because we're looking for those things. That one basically went right by me because I wasn't at the meeting when that was approved. The money is there. What we need to do is appropriate the money for that. So you're saying council authorized 30%, up to 30%?
30% design work.
Okay, so the money is there. We will add that then to the appropriations. It did come from the money sitting. It's one of those escrow accounts. Actually, no, that one, the design work, we have it in late. So Is there anything else that you see that's missing? We will definitely put that on there.
Kim, I think we're still
Not
with
that I
you.
know. Yeah, not that I know of. That was the only one that was on the top of my head. My other question is, do we know how much the housing element is going to cost? Like, do we get an estimate from DD&A for that?
We have estimates for the scope of their, I received an estimate for the scope of their work throughout the rest of this year. The housing element, of course, is going to go past, the calendar year. So I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I can certainly bring that to you or speak with you about that once I, get those total numbers.
Okay.
I think it's within the REAP and LEAP grant funding amounts. So I believe it should be taken care of for that or with those 2 grant amounts. But I'll let you know and get dialed down numbers. Just haven't done that yet, to be honest, Kim, because we're just trying to see what the costs were going to be this fiscal year so we can present this.
Sure. And then I just have one last question. Well, I guess that's it for expenses. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Kim. Excuse me, Scott, any questions on expenses?
Yeah, just for Jeff on that LEAP question, you might have a good estimate on there based on what they charged us to update the most recent housing element. So that might be a good place to take a look, kind of get us in the ballpark. But an additional, I guess it's a question for Roberto on both the LEAP and the REAP grants. If we don't end up using all that money, are we able to appropriate it someplace else? For example, within the planning funding, since it's very close, are we able to do anything like that?
We can get you an exact answer. First, gut reaction would be no. Those grants were for the housing element, unless Denise Duffy and Associates can generate their invoice such that it is for housing element, and it's always after the fact. So we need to submit those invoices, and if they approve it, then we get reimbursed.
And
We'll have to take a look.
Councilmember Donaldson, I believe that as long as it's related to the development of the housing element, those funds can be spent. So not just drafting the element itself, studies, different things like that. And Denise Duffy and Associates is quite clear in maximizing our value of those grants as long as it's related to the element.
If I'm correct, I believe it can also help us with the zoning ordinances and all of the other ancillary documents that feed into the housing element to ensure that we are indeed compliant and up to date.
Yes.
So it would appear, if you look at the housing element, that was a heavy push for the first one in so many years that it appears that the actual housing element won't be as complicated as it was before, but there's a whole lot of stuff that goes with it this time that we didn't do last time.
That's correct, Mayor. It's anything that we can relate to it for the proper completion of it and to come into compliance can be funded through those grants.
Scott, we're still with you.
Okay, great. One other question then. I noticed we have significant legal expenses. And Alex, are you able to kind of give us a breakdown just in general terms where those amounts are going?
Yeah, Councilmember Donaldson, I can indeed. So the city has, I think putted along for many years with some lawsuits and things like that. Recently, we have been sued a number of times. A few of those were resolved early. But in the current case, for example, the CNPS lawsuit continues to go on. which was unforeseen at the time of budgeting, as well as I've been asked to step up my participation with the mayor and the city manager for sort of weekly check-ins and become a little bit more active on that front, as well as the city has received quite a few Public Records Act requests this past year, many more so and more extensive than in years past. And that's where those efforts are coming from.
If I may, Scott, if you look at the monthly budget breakout, I want to thank Alex for doing this. He's starting to divvy it up into what is CMPS, what is PRAs, and what is just general, support. So I want to thank him a lot for doing that. It's, excuse me, it's just kind of our constant evolution to go deeper into the budget so we all see and we're able to, as we get more money, things get more complicated, and to help us budget in the future.
Yeah, and through the mayor, if I might, I'm on my end, it's just a simple accounting thing here. So if there are in the future things you'd say, I'd like this broken out, that broken out, we're more than happy to do that for you. I think it's relatively easy for our accounting folks to do that.
Okay, thanks, Alex. That's all the questions I had.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Scott. Pat, any questions on expenses or comments?
No, everything has been covered that I was interested in. So thank you.
Okay. I too have no questions or comments on expenses, but I do just want to reiterate that, over the last several years, our budgets have gotten more and more broad to help us look at so many of the details that we're looking at today. And I just want to thank Jeff and Roberto and Alex for helping us get to this point. The next 2 pages of the budget adjustments are brand new. I had no idea that we had these other little pockets of funds. And so now everybody does. The other thing I just want to share, especially for Kim and Scott, and actually Pat, because she wasn't on the finance committee before, this is where the sausage is made, right? This is where we find things that don't make sense to us. Roberto and city managers look at it all the time and it looks the same, but it's important for us to have these different sets of eyes to look at what doesn't make sense. And then we bring it up and then Roberto goes, oh yeah, okay, I'll fix that. Which is why we have these meetings before we approve it at the council. So there is this feedback. And I just want to thank Roberto in particular for the years he's been doing this, and Alex for starting to divvy out things, but we're moving in the right direction. Kim.
Sorry, I have one more question. Roberto, can you explain what SB1 funds are? Since we're talking about these last 2 pages.
Yeah, SB1 is Senate Bill 1. It's otherwise known as the RRMA, Road Rehabilitation and Maintenance Act. It was the last major gas tax that was imposed in the state of California. I forget how many millions is supposed to have generated. You get money, the city, it's all allocated based on population for the most part. So the city only gets a little bit. That's, again, strictly for roads. And in this case, that money cannot supplant anything else that you're receiving. In the past, the city really hasn't done much. It's building up. When we get to this budget cycle, we will be bringing the fund balances where we're at. And that is money that will be available for streets and roads. Cannot supplant whatever you're doing right now. Whatever you're doing has to maintain, but above and beyond other expenses, it's just called SB1. Unfortunately, it's all acronyms, or RRMA. It still doesn't mean anything to you, but it's street related
Okay.
money, that's all.
Okay. And so what would we spend that money on? Jeff, do you, what goes above and beyond what we normally do for our streets?
Well, we do streets unless we get, a a project like slurry, slurring the streets or redoing them, and usually that's funded like through Measure X or SB1 even. Above and beyond, there are several things that Ron and I are looking at and talking about. One of the issues we'll be looking at possibly for part of this is, if it applies, is a lot of curbing on our streets are deteriorating and causing hazards or, flooding issues or things like that we'll be looking at. So Ron's got several ideas. We've already started talking about them, and that may be, in addition to other funding, we may look to do that. Since we've upgraded all of our streets, there are some curbing issues. So things like that are a possibility.
Okay, thank you.
And Mayor, if I may add, just because we're in this discussion, so if there's other things that you'd like a better explanation, because I mean, for me, I know what SB1 is, but if some of this terminology can also be put in more layman's terms, so it's more understandable not only for you, but also for the public, we can make, if there's things here that are like, you're not too sure what it is, let us know and we can make it a little bit clearer so that not only you, but the public can understand what these monies are or the expenses.
Roberto, could it be as simple as, so for example, the gas tax fund is street related purposes, right? And SB1 is for road rehabilitation. Measure X, which might be interesting to explain the advance we got and what we used it for and how it's not really available for us anymore. But that too, right, is road related. Coronavirus and Flora makes sense, but just something simple like that might be helpful.
Yeah, so we are planning, and again, we'll be bringing back the preliminary budget to the Finance Committee. Take a look at, we are looking to expand it a little bit more to provide more detail. The budget in the past has just been a couple of sheets, but with more of an explanation, especially as the city's getting more money. In the past, it was pretty much just general fund. That's all you had. Now you've got a little bit more to understand how they are related, because some you can use for one purpose, some you can only use for something else. So we will do that as we begin working on the budget.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So Roberto, did you want to go over kind of these miscellaneous accounts before I go out to Scott and Pat?
Not really, unless you want. I mean, they're minor. So maybe if I may, so when we prepared the mid-year review, as Jeff mentioned, we look for the bigger numbers because the smaller numbers are going to change. We're going to have a surplus here. Oh, now there's a deficit here. We don't want to be spending a lot of time chasing $500 here and $1,000 here. We're looking at the big numbers, which are the ones that are going to have an impact on the bottom line. Looking to make sure that we can keep it a positive bottom line by the end of the year. But we're more than happy to look at any details you want us to.
Okay, so I want to go, Kim, hang on, just let me give everybody else an opportunity first. Scott, do you have any questions or comments on the last 2 pages, the miscellaneous funds?
No, I don't. Roberto hit it, on the head. Those are, small numbers. I just, the biggest number on there that really jumps out to me is the legal expenses. Everything else besides, our contract with Seaside Fire, I mean, it's the biggest one that we've got. So that's why, that was the reason for my previous comments, but no other comments. Thank you.
Mayor,
Pat, any question? Hang on just a second, Jeff.
Absolutely.
Pat, any?
I think a lot of the public doesn't realize the cost of when they request the public records, that goes into the legal fees as well as staff fees. And I think it's important that the public knows that they just think it's, okay, here, do it kind of thing. And so I would like that to be emphasized at some point along the way.
So that could definitely be something that you mention when we review and vote on this, because Alex is divvying them out. And so you can identify how much costs are aligned with PRAs.
Yes, but I think that in some way the public needs to be really informed of what the costs are that I don't think they're aware of.
Okay. Any other questions, comments?
That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Kim?
I just had a question. So it looks like we've been getting the gas tax funds for several years. So I'm wondering, and moving street sweeping and street lighting into the gas tax fund seems super reasonable. Why were those costs in our general fund to begin with? Like, why were they never always put into the gas tax fund?
So it has to do with the way the city's accounting has been in the past. Even though it's been reported in the general fund at the end of the year, the gas tax funding, there's been transfers that have taken place at the end of the year to get it covered by the gas tax fund.
Oh.
But we'd like to start making it part of the budget because it's that way it's transparent, it's upfront rather than, oh yeah, these are monies that can be used on the gas tax. And we've been working on cleaning up the gas tax fund. The city underwent a 12-year audit of the gas tax fund about 4 years ago. And so actually that's when we came up with developed a new accounting system, because technically that has to be in what's called fund accounting, and the city was using QuickBooks, which doesn't provide fund accounting. So brought on a new system, and little by little we're trying to get everything a little more squared away so it's easier to understand and report at the end of the year.
Great. Thank you. And then one last question. I was wondering about the police audit. Where does that fall into all of this?
So with regards to the audit, there was a TAMC Measure X audit that was done. There's several other work that the auditors do right now. We're waiting on the city's, excuse me, the general audit of the city. From there, the police, airport police services audit will be done. We should have, well, excuse me, the audit won't be ready for presentation at this council meeting. We've had a few issues with some of the changeover, and then one of the reports that an actuary prepares for the city, it's called GASB 75, turned out to be wrong. So we requested that they redo this. The report won't be ready, but the numbers that we use should be finalized by the end of next week. So when we start doing the preliminary budget, we will have correct ending fund balances, which is what we want. We want, where did the city end, so we can know how much was left over and going forward. And as soon as that's done, let's see, I would envision by the end of February, we should have the police audit done. Well, it's not the police audit, airport police services.
Okay.
And it's not an audit, it's called an agreed upon procedures. We everybody agreed, well, this is the way we're gonna look at the numbers, and this was the outcome, and then the airport will be advised of the outcome if they owed more or they didn't know as much.
And if I may, just add a different nuance. So for example, the COP grant and the COVID grant will go against our half of that agreement, right? It doesn't come off the top, it comes against ours. So, you know, every bit of funds that come in to help our police will be credited to the city.
Yes.
Okay. Jeff, you?
Just two things. One, when it comes to legal services, I just want to thank Alex because we've been putting a lot of work on him lately. And he's been as responsive, I think, as anybody could be. I would say, as we start doing more projects, it's not, you know, as Roberto says, when we get more money, our budget gets more complex. But as we start doing more projects and looking at development and planning, our legal expenses are going to go up. I don't necessarily think that, you know, CNPS may be part of it. To raise it, I think it's $10,000 to $15,000 in PRA reviews just this last year so far. They're a significant expense. You know, CNPS is probably upwards of 45 or 50, depending on where we're going. But just from my perspective, I know I haven't been here too long. I would expect that increasing our legal costs where we've been historically is something we're probably going to have to look at in the budget for the next few years, because things are getting more complicated in the city and need to be reviewed more. So that's just the one thing that I want to let council know ahead of time while Roberto and I and Alex and everyone works on this next budget cycle. Number two is, as far as the grants, Mayor, that's a great point. When we did the contract with the airport in the agreement, we left grants out. The airport gets grants and we get grants. And we kind of parsed those out and said, hey, you keep your grant because they get TSA reimbursement for law enforcement, but we get our COPS grants. So we tried to leave those things out, and they're very similar amounts. So if that clarifies it a little more.
Great. So it feels like we're wrapping things up. Pat, any last budget comments?
No, thank you.
Okay. Scott?
No, I'm good, thanks.
Okay. And Kim?
No, thank you, Roberto, Jeff, Alex. Thanks for answering all of our questions. I really appreciate it. It's nice to have an opportunity to ask these fine, detailed questions. I appreciate it.
My last comments have to do with Roberto. Roberto is not our one and only person at RGS. Hermelinda does the payroll, and Roberto, am I correct here?
Yes.
Okay. And so I just wanted everyone to realize that Roberto has always done the budget kinds of things and the bigger picture, but there is another person, at least one person I know of at RGS, that is helping with a pretty significant transition, going from Kim, who did it for nearly 2 decades, to someone new. There's always translation in that, people see numbers differently. And so I want to thank Roberto and Hermelinda for the work helping us get over this transition. Transitions are complicated and often a little more time consuming. So thank you for that, Roberto.
You're welcome.
And Jeff, nice job with your first mid-year budget.
Thanks. I will take the credit, and I'll just thank Roberto later.
All right. So on that note, we will, for the council members, this will come back after kind of massaging all of our questions and for us to do a final review and a vote of support at the February council meeting, correct? Okay. All right. So on that, I do believe we are done. Next meeting will be the regular city council meeting, February 23rd at 6 p.m. On that, we're adjourned. Thank you all for participating.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.